There is a moment in every human life when silence feels heavier than noise. A moment when you are not running anymore, not fighting, not proving, but simply existing with a question pressing quietly against your chest. Why has my life unfolded this way? Why does struggle seem familiar to me? Why do I feel different, even when I try so hard to blend in? You may not ask these questions out loud, but you feel them in the early morning hours, in the pauses between conversations, in the strange sense that something important is unfinished. For thousands of years, religious traditions have spoken to this experience, not as coincidence, not as weakness, but as calling. The Bible, in particular, does not begin with answers. It begins with interruption. God interrupting ordinary lives. A shepherd becomes a leader. A prisoner becomes a ruler. A forgotten child becomes a prophet. And almost always, the calling arrives disguised as disruption. The video we are examining today taps directly into that ancient pattern. It does not open with doctrine. It does not begin with explanation. It begins with interruption. Stop scrolling. This is not merely a digital command. It is a symbolic act, a modern echo of a biblical moment when the voice of God interrupts routine. Moses tending sheep, Samuel lying in the temple, Elijah hiding in a cave. In each case, the interruption carries a message. Pay attention. This moment matters. The video frames the viewer not as an audience, but as an individual. Not as part of a crowd, but as a singular recipient of meaning. From a theological perspective, this is a powerful move. It mirrors the biblical idea that divine calling is personal before it is public, that God speaks to persons before he speaks to nations. Yet it also raises an important question. What happens when ancient spiritual language is delivered through modern algorithms? When sacred ideas of chosenness, purpose, and destiny are reframed inside a digital environment built on attention, emotion, and urgency? Is the message pointing toward God or toward the self? Is it awakening faith or amplifying vulnerability? In this analysis, we will not rush to condemn, nor will we rush to endorse. Instead, we will slow down. We will examine the structure, the themes, and the theology beneath the surface. We will ask why this message feels so convincing, why it resonates with those who feel unseen, burdened, or spiritually restless. And we will place it into conversation with Scripture, with historical theology, and with the long tradition of spiritual formation. Because the question is not simply, is this video true? The deeper question is this: what does it reveal about the human hunger for meaning and how faith is being reshaped in the digital age? To answer that, we must begin where the video begins, with the idea of being chosen. Part 1. Why the chosen one narrative is so powerful. To understand why this message feels so compelling, we must first understand the weight of the word chosen. In everyday language, being chosen means being selected over others. It implies value. It implies intention. It implies that your existence is not random. In the Bible, the idea of being chosen appears again and again, but it is rarely presented as a reward. More often, it is presented as a burden. Abraham is chosen and immediately asked to leave everything familiar. Moses is chosen and sent back to the place he ran from. Jeremiah is chosen and told he will speak words people do not want to hear. Biblical chosenness is not about elevation first. It is about responsibility first. However, the video reframes chosenness in a very specific way. It speaks to those who feel overlooked, those who feel misunderstood, those who feel like life has demanded more from them than from others. And that is not accidental. Psychologically, people who experience prolonged stress, isolation, or repeated disappointment often search for meaning that redeems their pain. They are not looking for applause. They are looking for explanation. The chosen one narrative provides exactly that. It tells the listener, you're not struggling because you are failing. You're struggling because you are different. This shift is subtle, but powerful. It transforms suffering from a question mark into a confirmation sign. From a theological perspective, this taps into a real biblical tension. Scripture does teach that God often works through the weak, the rejected, and the overlooked. But it also warns against turning that truth into a personal exemption from humility or accountability. The video does something interesting here. It removes the communal dimension of calling. There is no church, no spiritual elders, no testing of discernment. The confirmation happens privately, directly, and emotionally. This mirrors a modern spiritual trend: faith without structure, calling without community, authority without accountability. The listener is told that the message is not for everyone. It is not for friends, not for family, not for the people who hurt you. It is for you. This exclusivity creates intensity, and intensity creates attachment. Historically, religious movements have often used the same structure. From mystery cults in the ancient world to certain revivalist movements in the modern era, the promise of hidden knowledge has always attracted those who feel left out of power. The Bible itself speaks of mystery, but biblical mystery is revealed for transformation, not separation. It leads people deeper into love, service, and truth. Here, the mystery leads inward. The viewer is encouraged to interpret their isolation as evidence of spiritual elevation. Loneliness becomes confirmation. Rejection becomes proof. This is where the message becomes emotionally persuasive, but theologically fragile, because Scripture also teaches that isolation can be both preparation and danger. Jesus withdrew to pray, but he also lived in constant relationship. Paul experienced solitude, but always returned to community. When chosenness becomes detached from relationship, it risks becoming a spiritual echo chamber. Yet we must be honest. For someone lying awake at night, carrying emotional weight they cannot explain, this message feels like relief. It gives language to pain. It dignifies confusion. It tells a story where suffering has a point. And that is why it works. Not because it invents the idea of calling, but because it speaks it in a tone of certainty to those who feel uncertain about everything else. Part 2. Spiritual warfare, fear, and the psychology of threat. Once the narrative establishes that the viewer is chosen, it immediately introduces the idea of conflict. Not just any conflict, but spiritual warfare. The language shifts. It becomes sharper, more urgent. Enemies are invisible, but omnipresent. Attacks are personal, yet cosmic. This is a deliberate strategy. Fear is one of the most powerful emotional triggers. When people feel threatened, their attention narrows, their memory strengthens, and their desire for guidance intensifies. By framing life as a battlefield, the video creates a context in which every struggle is meaningful. Every disappointment, every betrayal is no longer random. It is an attack. And because you are chosen, you are the target. This is psychologically compelling. It externalizes internal pain. It assigns blame to forces beyond the self. It transforms confusion into narrative coherence. The video uses biblical imagery to amplify this effect. It references armor, attacks, spiritual enemies, imagery found in Ephesians 6. But it does so selectively, emphasizing the danger and minimizing the accountability or guidance that Scripture also teaches. Notice how this works. The viewer begins to scan their own life for evidence of attack. Missed promotions, broken relationships, unexpected setbacks, sudden losses. All are now interpreted as signs that something larger is at work, something intentional, something that requires discernment. At the same time, the narrative subtly promises protection. You are chosen, and therefore you are defended. You are guided. You are anointed. This duality of threat and protection is highly addictive. It produces a cycle of vigilance and reassurance, which keeps the viewer emotionally engaged. From a theological perspective, this reflects a partial truth. The Bible does speak of spiritual warfare. Evil is real. Temptation is real. But the Bible also emphasizes peace, grace, and the presence of God in ordinary life. The danger in the video's framing is that it exaggerates threat and minimizes presence, turning spiritual life into constant battle rather than ongoing relationship. Psychologically, this is also powerful because humans are wired to detect patterns. We are meaning-making machines. By labeling setbacks as spiritual attacks, the video gives the brain a map of cause and effect, where previously there was only uncertainty. But here's the subtle genius. The attacks are never fully revealed. You are warned, but not given all the details. Enemies are shadowy, ambiguous, so the viewer must constantly stay alert, always listening, always watching, always needing guidance from the voice on the video. This creates dependency, not dependency on doctrine or community, but on the narrative itself. By the end of this section, the viewer feels chosen, under siege, and yet protected. It's a cocktail of emotions that deepens engagement. And engagement is what drives not just views, but belief and even personal identification with the story. Part 3. Divine timing, personal identity, and the promise of destiny. Now that the viewer is aware of spiritual battles, the narrative shifts from threat to hope and purpose. This is the pivot point. It moves from fear to anticipation, from struggle to destiny, from doubt to identity. The video begins to weave divine timing into the personal story. Every setback, every delay, every period of waiting is framed not as failure, but as preparation, a season ordained, a moment appointed by God. Notice the language. You're exactly where you need to be. The waiting is working in your favor. God's timing is perfect. These phrases are intentionally soothing, but also subtly commanding attention. They suggest that patience is not passive, but active participation in a divine plan. This ties directly to personal identity. The viewer is no longer just a person facing random events. They are chosen, anointed, special, destined for something greater than themselves. The psychological effect is profound. Identity is one of the strongest motivators in human behavior. When someone believes they are chosen for a divine purpose, their perception of challenges changes. Every difficulty becomes meaningful. Every disappointment becomes a step toward destiny. Every success is confirmation of divine favor. The video also uses anecdotal storytelling here. Stories of people who waited, struggled, or faced opposition and then experienced sudden breakthroughs create a sense of pattern recognition. If it happened to them, it can happen to me. The brain starts mapping personal experiences onto these narratives, reinforcing the belief that their life is uniquely guided. Another key element is urgency. The narrative reminds the viewer that timing matters. Opportunities are fleeting. God's plan unfolds in seasons. This instills a sense of attentiveness and readiness. It's no longer enough to hope. Action must align with timing, or the opportunity could pass. Notice also the use of contrast. Ordinary people versus chosen ones. Waiting versus breakthrough. Struggle versus destiny. By framing life in terms of contrasts, the video emphasizes the exceptional nature of the viewer. You are not ordinary. You are set apart. You are being prepared. Finally, this section begins to blend encouragement with accountability. The chosen one must recognize signs, discern opportunities, and maintain faith. This subtly shifts responsibility from random chance to personal alignment with divine will. The viewer is guided to see themselves as an active participant in the unfolding of destiny, not just a passive observer. Part 4. Discernment, Truth, and the Danger of Misinterpretation. After the surge of affirmation and urgency, the narrative quietly introduces a new layer: discernment. This is where the message slows down again. The tone becomes calmer, more reflective. Because power without wisdom is dangerous, and calling without truth can lead to confusion. The video suggests that not every voice is trustworthy. Not every opportunity is from God. Not every feeling of excitement is divine confirmation. This echoes a deep biblical principle. In Scripture, calling is always tested. Dreams are weighed. Prophecies are examined. Spiritual experiences are discerned in light of truth, character, and fruit. The listener is reminded that being chosen does not mean being infallible. Even those chosen by God made mistakes. David was anointed, yet fell. Peter was called, yet denied. Calling does not remove human limitation. It reveals the need for humility. Here, the message subtly shifts from empowerment to responsibility. The chosen one must learn to listen carefully, to distinguish between God's voice and personal desire, between faith and impulse, between courage and pride. This section also reframes waiting once more, not as punishment, not as delay, but as protection. Sometimes doors remain closed not because you are unworthy, but because you are not yet ready. And sometimes clarity does not arrive in excitement, but in quiet obedience. The video hints that discernment grows through discipline, through patience, through alignment with truth, not just emotion. This balances the earlier intensity, preventing the narrative from collapsing into spiritual fantasy. There is also an implicit warning. If the chosen identity becomes centered on self-glorification, it loses its spiritual grounding. True calling leads outward, toward service, love, and transformation of others, not inward toward superiority or isolation. This is a crucial moment, because it reframes chosenness not as status, but as stewardship. The listener is encouraged to ask better questions, not "Why am I special?" but "What am I entrusted with?" Not "Who is against me?" but "Who am I called to serve?" The video does not yet resolve these questions. It allows them to linger, to create space for reflection, to deepen the internal dialogue of the viewer. And it is here, in this quiet tension between confidence and humility, that the message prepares for its final movement. Not toward ego, not toward fear, but toward mature faith. Part 5. Maturity, Silence, and the Hidden Season. At this stage, the narrative moves into a quieter place. Not weaker, but deeper. After identity, warfare, destiny, and discernment, there is one reality that remains unavoidable. Growth does not always feel spiritual. Sometimes it feels ordinary. Sometimes it feels slow. Sometimes it feels silent. The video begins to acknowledge a truth many messages avoid, that after revelation, there is often obscurity. In Scripture, this pattern is unmistakable. David is anointed king, then returns to the fields. Joseph receives dreams, then enters prison. Jesus hears the Father's voice at baptism, then disappears into the wilderness. Calling does not immediately lead to visibility. Often, it leads to hidden seasons. The chosen one is not always placed on a platform. More often, they are placed in preparation, in routine, in repetition, in obedience when no one is watching. This challenges modern expectations, especially in a digital culture that rewards instant results. The video gently confronts this tension. If you are truly chosen, you must learn to endure invisibility without resentment. Silence is emphasized here, not as abandonment, but as refinement. When God is silent, it is not because he is absent. It is because listening must deepen. Faith must mature beyond emotional reassurance into trust without constant confirmation. This is where many people struggle. The excitement fades, the affirmations stop, the breakthroughs delay, and this is precisely where maturity is formed. The video reframes this season as a test of posture. Will you continue to do what is right when there is no applause? Will you remain faithful when progress is slow and unclear? This is not punishment. It is formation. The chosen one is shaped not only by revelation, but by restraint. Not only by confidence, but by patience. Not only by vision, but by character. There is also a warning embedded here. Those who rush ahead of timing often damage what they were meant to steward. Premature exposure can crush what is still fragile. So the hidden season protects, it grounds, it strengthens. The video does not glamorize this phase. It speaks of discipline, of consistency, of showing up daily without guarantees, and yet there is quiet assurance beneath the weight. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is overlooked. Every unseen moment is counted. The chosen one is not forgotten. They are being prepared in ways that visibility could never achieve. This section does not end with triumph. It ends with resolve. To remain steady, to remain grounded, to remain faithful. Because what comes next will require strength that only silence can produce. Part 6. Community, responsibility, and the return to others. After the hidden season, the narrative turns outward. This is a critical shift because true calling never ends in isolation. It always moves toward others. The video begins to correct a misunderstanding that can quietly grow within the chosen narrative. That being set apart means being set above. Scripture teaches the opposite. Those who are called are not elevated for status, but lowered into service. Authority in the biblical sense is always tied to responsibility. Moses returns to lead a people, not to escape them. Joseph governs to preserve life, not to prove himself. Jesus washes feet before he bears the cross. Calling matures when it leaves the private realm and enters community. The video emphasizes that preparation is not just personal. It is relational. Character is tested among people, not in solitude. This is where many chosen narratives fail. They encourage separation rather than reconciliation. They validate withdrawal rather than engagement. But here, the message pivots. You are not called to be unreachable. You are called to be reliable. The chosen one is invited to return, not with superiority, but with humility. To listen more than speak. To serve more than impress. To build rather than divide. This section reframes opposition once again. Not everyone who disagrees with you is an enemy. Not every challenge is spiritual warfare. Sometimes friction is formation. Community exposes blind spots. It refines motives. It grounds calling in love rather than ego. The video stresses accountability. Chosen individuals are still answerable. They are still teachable. They still need correction. This is not a loss of identity. It is the strengthening of it. The chosen one who refuses community risks becoming isolated, defensive, and rigid. But the chosen one who embraces responsibility becomes stable, trustworthy, and fruitful. The narrative now carries a quieter authority, no longer driven by urgency or threat, but by wisdom and clarity. You're not here to escape people, you are here to serve them. This is the return, not to the past, but to purpose. The video allows this idea to settle. It does not rush resolution, because responsibility is not dramatic, it is daily. And it is here, in the slow faithfulness of shared life, that calling proves itself real. Conclusion. At the end of this journey, we return to a simple but demanding truth. Calling is not a label. It is a process. It does not begin with confidence and end with recognition. It begins with interruption and continues through obedience, humility, and time. The idea of being chosen is not meant to inflate the self. It is meant to anchor the soul, to remind us that life is not random, but also not centered on us alone. Scripture never presents calling as an escape from struggle. It presents it as a reason to endure with purpose. Those who are called are not spared from difficulty. They are shaped by it. If you have felt unseen, delayed, or misunderstood, that does not automatically make you chosen. But it may mean you are being invited to grow in wisdom rather than urgency, in faithfulness rather than recognition. The danger of modern spiritual messages is not that they speak of purpose, but that they separate purpose from responsibility. They promise destiny without discipline, identity without accountability, assurance without formation. True calling is quieter than hype, stronger than emotion, slower than expectation. It is revealed over time, tested in community, and confirmed by fruit. Not by how special you feel, but by how faithfully you serve. Not by how many enemies you imagine, but by how deeply you love. Not by how loudly you claim destiny, but by how consistently you walk in truth. If this message has stirred something in you, let it not end in self-focus. Let it lead you toward patience, discernment, and responsibility. Because those who are truly called do not ask first, "What was I chosen for?" They ask, "Who am I becoming?" And they allow that answer to unfold slowly, honestly, and faithfully before God and others. That is where real calling is found.